It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, I just posted a political rant, and by and large, I don't do a lot of just me on the podcast. It's news, blues, and interviews, and since I don't make any news and I can't play the blues and you got to have another person to do an interview, it's not me a lot of the times. But I talk to people and they really would like to hear, some folks anyway, more of just me. And folks in particular want to hear old-timey stories, kind of. They want to hear about the way things used to be and more about my background and life. And a lot of people really like the Garrison Keillor approach. Well, I tell them, I'm not Garrison Keillor, and I didn't grow up on Lake Wobegon. And to be real truthful with you, I never really cared much for that crap. I don't know. I tried listening to it, and honest to God, I was late for the door. It took a long time to not hear much on that radio show. But today, because of Father's Day, I thought I'd tell a little bit of a story that'll fill you in on the background, my background, and tell you something about my father. And it's a good story besides. Matter of fact, I told it at his funeral, and I like telling it. So it really is a snapshot of the relationship between me and my dad. But I grew up in Iowa on a farm back in the day, and this is something you don't hardly see anywhere anymore. I grew up on a dirt road. And I can't overstate the significance of that. The significance is that if you grow up on a dirt road, like people did back in the day in Iowa on the farm, you were isolated whether you liked it or not. The reason you were isolated was when it rained, no one went anywhere. Nobody came in, and by and large, nobody went out. Now, before my time, you had to have a horse to get around, and then you had to have a four-wheel drive vehicle, which they weren't as plentiful as they are now. Guys didn't have four-wheel drive pickups, or the farm tractor. And you didn't go very far or very fast on a farm tractor, and they were open cabs, and it wasn't a great way to travel, particularly in the rain or in the winter. So you just learned to live on the farm, literally. So here I am as a young boy growing up on the farm. The only traffic some days was the road grader that came down to grade the dirt road, or the mailman. And that was a big deal. I mean, I'd sit outside at the end of the driveway sometimes for an hour waiting for the mailman to come through, and I was always amazed at that. The dude drove on the wrong side of the car. I mean, that was really cool, and you could see the dirt dust coming from a mile away, and here comes the mailman, and ooh, what would he have? I mean, he would have yesterday's newspaper. The evening paper was what most farmers got in the morning. So you got yesterday's news. You didn't get junk mail like you get today, so you didn't have to worry about that. And the one thing on the farm that was magical, really, there was a place in Des Moines called Dean Studios. A lot of people may remember that. And for, I don't know, $1 or less, it had to be less, I would think, my mother was able to put a roll of film from her Instamatic in an envelope, send it off, and then a day or two from Des Moines, they turned it around very quickly. It was magical, the processing. You would get back the photo prints in another envelope to do the same thing again. So that was the big deal. The paper, okay, it was coming, but if you could get that envelope from Dean Studios with the photographs, oh man, that was magic. Well, anyway, I grew up on the farm, on the dirt road, eventually was rocked, and that improved things considerably, not only on our farm, but all over the state of Iowa. It really opened up the world to these farmers. You can look in history, and a lot of farm families, a lot of people never went beyond, I don't know, like a 10 or 15-mile radius of their farmsteads back in the day when the roads were dirt. And there was a big movement back in the 30s, I think, or maybe shortly thereafter, to rock the roads. Not gravel, and I pointed that out in an earlier podcast. Gravel comes from the riverbed. It's loose. It's not a very good road surface. It was rock. They came from the limestone quarries in dump trucks, which my dad owned out there on the farm. We also ran a line of dump trucks and heavy equipment. They came from 30, 40, 50 miles away and rocked the road. And that was the modern era, really, for me, out on the farm. So I grew up out there and learned about livestock and farming and watched my dad, and he ran the company with the trucks and then also did the farming, and it took both because it was a small farm. It was only 120 acres, and you couldn't feed a family of 3 or 4 or 5 on a 120-acre farm even back then. You needed to diversify, and he did with that trucking and excavating company. Well, so here, let's get to the point of the story. As I was growing up, my dad finally let me on the tractor. And believe it or not, I wanted to do that. I don't know. It seems like kids today try to get out of work, but I suppose every old person always thinks that. But man, I wanted to be on that tractor. I wanted to be farming. I wanted to contribute. And my dad did too, because he needed the help. And when I got old enough, I did it. And I was a small person. I always have been short. I'm only 5'7" today. And as a kid, I had to stand up to put the pedal down, press the clutch on the Oliver 88 tractor that we had, and grab a hold of the steering wheel and stand up and press down on that clutch to put it in gear or to pause. And a lot of times the reason to pause is because you were coming to some rough ground. And I remember it was dangerous because if you were off your feet, off your seat, if you were standing, you could get bounced off of that thing. And it about happened to me more than once on that Oliver 88 diesel tractor that my dad had. It was a great tractor. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go to Google Photos or something and check out a picture of it. It was streamlined. It was the most powerful farm tractor, I think, when it was originally built in Iowa. It's an Iowa-made tractor. Just a great piece of machinery. But anyway, so fast forward here a little bit. I'd been farming for a while. I was kind of a rough and tumble teenager. I don't know how old I was exactly, somewhere between the years of 15 and 20 maybe. And we had a big soil bank hill on the farm that was so steep an incline that we didn't till it very often. Farmers back then, there was a program called Soil Bank, and now I think it's called Set Aside or CRP, or I don't know what they call it now, but it used to be called Soil Bank, and I think that came around in the Eisenhower era. But there were parts of the farm that you didn't farm, you didn't till, and you were compensated by the government, not much, for setting it aside, putting it in the soil bank, and that's the way that hill was. But this year, my dad decided he was going to farm it. Maybe he decided he was going to farm it because I would be the one doing the farming. But anyway, he sent me out on the tractor. This is an open cab, old Oliver 88 tractor to plow this field. And it was the first time it had been plowed in years. In the springtime, things hadn't greened up yet, and all of the tall grass from the previous year was still on the hillside. And I went out with the 3-bottom plow, 3/16s. Farm boys will know what that means. On the back of this Oliver, people would find that hard to believe. A 3-bottom plow, but that's what I was using. And I went out on this hill. Well, tilling practices were such that you practiced contour plowing. You went not up and down the hill, you went around the hill to keep erosion in check. So I'm trying to plow around this hill, on the side of the hill, through this tall grass. And the tall grass keeps getting choked up in the mow boards of the plow. And if you're on a side hill like that, the big danger is, and a lot of people have probably wonder how these farmers back in the day particularly, but still, how they could upset a tractor. And it killed a lot of farmers. The tractors would roll over and crush the farmer. How does that happen? Well, if you're on a side hill like that and you're going around it, the thing that is holding you on the hill, the thing that's keeping you there from sliding down or overturning if it's a really steep incline, is the plow itself in the ground. It's holding you on the hill. Well, because of this old tall grass from the year before, the plow was getting choked up, and it would pop out of the ground, literally. I mean, it wouldn't keep in the dirt. It would force the plow up out of the ground instantly with no warning, and it caused the tractor to tip a couple of times a little bit. I mean, I could feel it wanting to roll. I didn't like that. I didn't care for that too much. That's a spooky deal. So stop the tractor immediately, get off, and pull the grass and weeds out of the plow and set it back in the ground and take off again. Well, I did that a few times, and being old enough to have a temper, it finally irritated me enough to where I looked back at that plow, choked full of weeds, had about rolled over again, at least in my mind anyway. Now, that's enough of that. I'm not getting off to pull those weeds out of there any longer, and because it was tough. I mean, they would get really choked, really tight in there. It was not easy. It would take not minutes. It'd take minutes, maybe half an hour to get those weeds out of there sometimes. Maybe not that long. But anyway, you know what I mean. It would take a while, and you do it over and over and over. Well, I thought to myself, I can just burn that grass out of there. As I mentioned, it was dead grass, tall grass from the year before. I'll just burn that out of the plow. Now, this plow was not a 3-point hitch plow. Again, farmers will know what I'm talking about. That's a plow that's on the back of the tractor that comes completely up out of the ground and is in the air when it's raised. This was a plow that was running on a hydraulic, and it had wheels, and it stayed on the ground, and the plow jerked up out of the ground, the mow boards. So here I am, plowing the air, choked full of weeds, and I decided to just burn the weeds out. I'll just set them on fire, and I'll sit here on the tractor and watch these weeds burn out of there, and I've got a pretty good system. So I went back, lit it on fire, went back up, sat on the tractor, and turned around and looked at it, and man, these weeds are really burning because they're old. I mean, they're dry stuff from the year before. And then I got to looking at that plow. The plow had, as I mentioned, tires. It had hydraulic hoses, and I got to thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna ruin the old man's plow with this fire that I've started that's burning in. So, how do I put the fire out? I can't pull the weeds out. That was the problem to start with. So I thought, well, I'll just plow the fire out. I'll just take off, and the dirt, as soon as it burns itself down, as soon as I can get it back in the ground, the dirt will put the fire out. So I did exactly that, and I'm plowing along, and the fire is getting less and less. It was looking pretty good here. The dirt is doing just exactly what I thought it would. It's putting the fire out. But then I turn around and look at it, and to my horror, to get that done, basically, what I've done is I've started a string of fire about 1/8 of a mile long, maybe 1/4 of a mile long, and now the whole field is catching on fire. And it is going. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I got no means to put this out. There's no water anywhere near. I got a fire. It's out of control. And every farmer's field is by another farmer's field. Oh my God. And so sitting there on the top of this hill, I look towards the farmhouse, and here comes my old man's pickup. Here comes Dad in the truck. He sees the fire. He sees me on that side hill from wherever he's at. And oh, God, this is going to be a life-ending experience. Am I in trouble now? And what are we going to do? There's no solution to this. The wind's blowing, I think, and the fire is really burning. So up comes the old man in the pickup and drives up there next to where I'm at, sitting there with my face hanging out and field on fire. And he looks at me, and I thought, oh, God, I am really going to catch it, because this is back in the day. I mean, this is not like it is now with everything politically and socially correct. This was, my old man had his hard edges, believe me, and I was a young man, and these are two folks that don't get along very well at times, and I'm thinking, I better prepare myself here. This could get ugly real fast, and it could have. My dad looks at me and says, decided to set the field on fire, huh? Burn it off. And I looked at him and kind of saw what appeared to be a lead or an opening. Yeah, that's what I was doing. Right, I was setting the field on fire, going to burn it off. He says, I'd have done the same thing too. Now he says, boy, you take that tractor and you plow around this field, the edge of the field, the perimeter of this field. Because if you don't, you're going to burn the whole damn county down. So that's what I did. And I plowed around it, and the fire burnt the field off, made the plowing a lot easier, didn't catch anything else on fire. And I always wondered, now again, this, you got to remember, we're telling the story because of Father's Day. I always wondered if my dad wasn't cutting me some major slack, wasn't giving me the break of a lifetime, because he knew that I had no intention of setting that field on fire and burning it off to making easier plowing. But I don't know. And I will never know, because I never asked him. I never went there. And it's one of those things I would encourage young folks and people listening to the podcast, if you have an opportunity, if you have an unanswered question that you want to ask a parent, get it done, because someday they're all gone. Everything's used up. It's all dust to dust, and you'll never be able to get that question answered. But that's the story. That's one of my favorites about me growing up on the farm and my dad. Way back in the day, we're talking, I don't know, this would have been probably late 60s, maybe early 70s, in Iowa. And it ain't no Lake Wobegon story, and there's no Garrison Keeler here, but it is true. It's a true story. On Father's Day, 2019. And that's all I wanted to do, was just share that today. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Listen to us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Google Play, Spotify, all of those places. And we'll be back very soon with more of what the podcast, I think, really should be. Unless you disagree, and if you do, let me know, because it's news, blues, and interviews. All the best. That's another podcast by George.
That sky goes on forever, even after the trail's gone.